Hello, my name is Joe, and welcome to my channel, Joe's Book and Movie Corner. These past few days, I have been ill. I've been sick. I've had sleepless nights. I've had chills. I've had bad dreams. I've been overall quite weary. And my experience these past few days has actually given me a connection to a couple of the characters in the book that I'm reading now. In particular, Lucy, a character in the novel I'm reading currently, and it is, of course, Dracula by Bram Stoker. I am reading this with Randy Ray's Lone Star Book Club. Randy Ray, the literate Texan. His book club is going on all year, and for the month of October, he selected the horror classic Dracula. This is a book I've never read before, so I'm reading it for the first time, and I'm really enjoying it. Also, this book happens to coincide with a reading event called Victober, where you read works of Victorian literature in the month of October. Also, it's a great book just to read for Halloween. So if you've never read it before and you're interested, feel free to jump in. You can catch up to the readings in the Lone Star Book Club. We're going through about 5 or 6 chapters a week. Randy made a video earlier in the week on his video, I think was on chapters 6 through 10. I'm going to be talking about chapters 5 through 10. And each week, my plan is to be posting a video. Usually I do it a few days later, I think, than Randy will. My reading is a little bit behind, I think, everyone else's in the group. But this video, I'm going to talk about chapters 6 through 10, and I'm just going to go through just a few things that I'm pointing out. This might be a little bit scattered, but this is my first time reading the book, so I'm pointing out just things that I like, things that I find unsettling, and I might be picking out some things that maybe I think are foreshadowing later events in the novel. And, I'm just going to be calling out questions that I have. So you might see a little bit more editing than my normal videos as I kind of flip through the book and go through my underlined passages. But what happens in this? By the way, I'm going to be spoiling everything in chapters 6 through 10, so just be warned. So what happens? In the first 4 chapters, Jonathan Harker was in Castle Dracula. As Randy mentions in his video, those first 4 chapters are kind of a standalone story. And now in chapter 5, the world kind of opens up and this becomes more of a monster movie. And I agree with that assessment from Randy. New characters are introduced. In particular, Mina is Jonathan's fiance. Lucy and her 3 suitors. Lucy is kind of the sickly character in these chapters, who I related to very much as I've been sick. One of her suitors is really important, Dr. Seward. We see many letters and journal entries from his point of view. Renfield is one of his patients. It's not outright said yet, but we know that he has some sort of relationship with Dracula. He is a servant or a familiar to Dracula. And then, of course, towards the end, Van Helsing will be introduced, who's a very entertaining character. Randy mentions, he mentions that the world opens up, it becomes more of a monster movie. And Randy in his video focused a lot on chapter 7, and in particular, just one portion of chapter 7, the Log of the Demeter. And he mentions that it's a horror story within a horror story, and that's absolutely correct. It is in these 6 chapters, though I think cohesively chapters 1 through 4 just are so strong, and this is kind of there's kind of a reset in the book. This is there's a very different feel in these chapters. That Log of the Demeter portion of chapter 7 is really, really good. And in fact, they did make a movie just based on that portion of the book, a movie I haven't seen yet. But let's go ahead and just kind of go through, and I'm just going to go through the book and just point out a few things that I found interesting. And this might be a little bit scattered, we might jump around here, but let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first little point that I want to call out is something that I appreciated from the author. At the end of chapter 4, I mentioned in my last video, Jonathan Harker, he's in Castle Dracula. He's scared out of his mind. He's on the run. I think if I'm not mistaken, is it gypsies are in the castle? and he's trying to hide from them, and people are running around him. He's in his hiding spot, and he's writing in his journal, and he switches to the present tense, and that increases the urgency. It increases the tension. It's really good. The only issue I had with it was, is it believable that he's like hiding, he's on the run in the castle, and he's like taking the time to write? That is the only aspect of that I didn't find quite believable. But the scene is so good that you just forgive it. However, at the very beginning, so you read that, and then you read chapter 5, and we totally switch to a different place. And it's Mina's point of view, his fiance. And she mentions that she's practicing in her journal entries, in her journal entries, she's practicing the use of shorthand, which she and Jonathan know how to write in. So it kind of immediately, Stoker addresses my concern here. And it's, well, Jonathan, he can write in shorthand. That's how he can write so fast. That's how he can literally write on the run. So I appreciated that. It was just one little detail I really, really liked. So as chapter 5 continues, we're getting to know Mina, we're getting to know Lucy. And they go out to, they kind of visit the sea. And this is important because Dracula is going to be arriving by the sea. So as we're at the sea, there's this great sense of foreboding, and there's something coming. There's mention of, there's a legend that when a ship is lost, you hear bells. So there's a foreshadowing of a ship being lost at sea. And they run into this weird old guy, and he tells them, what does he tell them? He tells them like this creepy story of a guy committing suicide. And Lucy and Mina, they're sitting by the sea. They're at this like stone bench. I think it's a stone bench. And it's Lucy's favorite spot. And then this old creepy guy he's really hard to understand. It's like writing in almost dialect, and it's kind of difficult. It's intentionally difficult to read. And he tells them this story about this man committing suicide at this exact spot. And Lucy's like, why did you tell me this? My thoughts exactly. Why are you telling me this? But it does kind of add this spooky, foreboding sense by the sea. And we know that something horrible is going to be coming by the sea. And it adds this great sense of foreboding. At some point in these chapters, there's going to be reference to Lucy being a sleepwalker. And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, she's been a sleepwalker her whole life, and recently this sleepwalking problem has cropped up again. Now, this is happening, unless I'm missing something, this is happening before Dracula even arrives. So I think it's interesting that Dracula is going to hone in on Lucy first. And she already is kind of a creature of the night. So my big question is this just a coincidence? Is there what reason does Dracula pick Lucy first? I mentioned we're introduced to this character Renfield, who we don't quite know a lot about yet in the story. We just know he's this creepy guy. We know his master is Dracula. It's not said outright, but we know it as the reader. Is somehow Renfield involved in Dracula picking Lucy? I don't know. This is a question I have. I mean, I've seen several movie adaptations of Dracula, but from movie to movie, the details are different, and there's never, as Randy mentions in his video, there's never been a true book accurate adaptation of Dracula. So it's an open question for me. Why? It's interesting to me that Lucy is kind of a creature of the night. She's the first victim in town that once Dracula comes over, he hones in on her. And why? Why does he pick Lucy? I'm not sure yet. One detail I want to mention, and so I won't talk too much about the log of the Demeter, but one thing I like, I'm honing in on grotesque and unsettling imagery. And in the log of the Demeter, we're drawn attention to this body that's been lashed. It's a corpse that's been tied to the helm. And I love how Stoker, he has this great skill, I think, as a writer, to just write this, to add these really macabre and grotesque details to the story. And they're sprinkled throughout. I mentioned in my last video, several details of just macabre scenes and imagery. The one in particular that really grossed me out and put a strong image in my head was the image of the sleeping Dracula. And he's like now younger because he's engorged himself with blood. And if I were to make my own movie, I would focus in on that. This idea of the engorged, gross, younger version of Dracula getting ready for his journey. The body lashed to the helm. That's something I would hone in on, and I'd make it look gross. There's, at the end of this video, I'm going to mention another really gross moment, but we'll get to that towards the end. Oh, another thing that I just kind of liked, another very kind of an obvious sense of foreboding and foreshadowing. When the Demeter comes in, a dog escapes. Now we know as the reader, oh, that's got to be Dracula disguised now as a dog. Later he will disguise himself as a bat. So this idea of Dracula's can turn themselves into bats, that comes from this. But first we see him as a dog. And it's mentioned that people are worried that we got to find this dog because if it's a stray dog out there, at some point it might become vicious and dangerous. And boy, I'll say, this thing is going to become dangerous. At the beginning of chapter 8, I noticed something that ties into something we honed in on in our group chat for the Lone Star Book Club. At the beginning of chapter 8, Mina mentions this idea of the new woman and new woman writers. And someone in the group chat mentioned the difference between how Dracula's brides feed. Dracula brings them the food. They don't go out. They're a little bit less independent. They're more dependent upon Dracula. But we haven't seen it yet, so I haven't seen it myself yet in the book. But Lucy, or is it someone else maybe? But the women that Dracula latches onto in England, they are going to go out and feed. They're a little bit more independent. So maybe this speaks to how in England is, it's England. It's a bit more civilized. It's a bit more progressive, maybe a bit more ahead, more advanced than the old world, the older world that exists a little bit more in Eastern Europe, where Dracula is from. And in chapter 8, she mentions this idea of the new woman. And one thing I want to hone in on here is from Mina's journal. She says, some of the new woman writers will someday start an idea that men and women should be allowed to see each other asleep before proposing or accepting. And she's mentioning this because Lucy's fiance, he sees her when she's asleep. So there's this level of intimacy before marriage and even before proposal. Now she's saying just seeing them asleep. Of course, we as the reader can infer maybe something a little bit more, maybe even further into the future. A new woman writer might say, well, maybe they can do more than just see each other asleep before proposal or marriage. So again, it adds to this idea of, is England a little bit more ahead than that old backwards Eastern Europe? So that's something that we kind of talked about a little bit into the group chat, and I think, so that's what made those new woman lines kind of stand out for me. And it's the sense that something from this old, more superstitious world is coming into this more advanced, civilized England. Something that I'm noticing throughout many chapters, and this ties into something that Randy mentioned in the group chat. I don't think he mentioned it in his video. So Randy noticed, and I didn't notice this, but once he said it, I was like, oh yeah, this is really obvious. In the first 4 chapters, there's not a lot of mention of color. He mentions that the only color that shows up is the very white teeth of the vampires and their very red lips. Other than that, there's no mention of color. Now, there is the mention of black. Dracula is described as being dressed in black. So it's interesting that the only other color is black. But yeah, with the vampires, I'm going to say 3 colors, black, white, and red are kind of the vampires. So Randy calls out, after chapter 4, there are more colors mentioned throughout the narrative. Now, that didn't really stand out to me as reading, but just as I'm going over some underlined passages, I am noticing that there's more colors mentioned. So it does offer this contrast in the Dracula castle chapters. It's a very black and white world with the red lips being the only color. Everything else is kind of black and white. The thing that I mentioned was throughout these chapters, there's several references to light in general. There's some very nice descriptions of light. Sometimes it's moonlight, sometimes it's sunlight. And often with the sunlight, there's repeated references to sunrises and sunsets. And there's even mention of a lighthouse. So, this could be doing a few different things. I don't have a fully formed idea of why why Stoker keeps going back to light references. Maybe it's to contrast with this darker black and white world of Dracula's castle, and as, could be as the Dracula, as the vampire comes to town, this black and white theme and then the red lip theme motif is going to be more present, and we have to contrast that with mention of colors and pretty light. Or maybe it's foreshadowing. I don't know how Dracula is going to be dispatched by the end of the book. I've seen him in movies. They've done away with him in a couple different ways. But one of the ways that you kill a vampire is with the arrival of sunlight. So I don't know if that's what's going to happen here, but it's whenever light is mentioned, moonlight, sunlight, sunrise, sunset, it really stands out to me. And yeah, I really enjoy whenever I see a light reference. I'm underlining it and I'm enjoying it quite a bit. In the last video, I mentioned that I was wondering if, as we get to different characters' points of view, so chapters 1 through 4 is all Jonathan Harker, and I was wondering if, with this epistolary format, an epistolary, it's a novel written as a series of letters and journal entries, we're going to get several different characters' points of view. And I was wondering, are the different characters, are they going to have a different voice? And I noticed that and I appreciate this, Dr. Seward absolutely feels like a doctor. His journal entries and letters, he has repeated like medical words that I had to look up. And he kind of thinks like a doctor analyzing his patient. There's great creepy chapters where he's kind of studying Renfield. Renfield seems, from a modern perspective, he seems like this paranoid schizophrenic. And it's interesting that Dr. Seward just kind of indulges in his paranoia. Renfield, it's really creepy. He eats flies and collects them and feeds them to spiders, and then he keeps asking for a cat. And to a certain degree, Dr. Seward humors him and just lets him, what are you doing with your spiders and your flies, Renfield? He does have a point where he stops. He's not going to give him a cat. But I think it's interesting that I think a more modern paranoid schizophrenic case, they would not be indulged in their delusions. And if they want flies at doctors, no, we're not going to give you flies to torture and eat. But the point is that I like how we clearly see different voices with the different characters, and there's a standout with Dr. Seward. And also, just when Van Helsing shows up, I haven't seen anything directly from Van Helsing's point of view. I'd be surprised if that happens, actually. But I like Van Helsing's, his slight... Sometimes dialect can be annoying in writing, but I like Van Helsing. I like how his grammar's a little bit turned around. He's from Amsterdam. So yeah, I like Dr. Seward's chapters. Something similar to the end of chapter 4, I mentioned there's a change to the present tense, and it increases the tension, it increases the sense of urgency and the pace of the story. Another technique that I'm noticing is, most of this is journal entries and letters, but sometimes Stoker switches to telegrams, and telegrams, of course, are just very short messages. And at the end of one of the chapters, at the end of chapter 9, Stoker switches to telegrams, and it's Seward speaking to Van Helsing, and he's saying that Lucy is getting better. And in one telegram, he says, "Patient better, still better today." The next day, telegram, "Patient greatly improving, good appetite," etc. And then on the third day, another telegram, "Terrible change from the worst, come at once." So like that change to present tense in Harker's journal entry. The telegrams I'm noticing are another way to increase the pace, increase the tension, and I really like that. I'm really growing to appreciate an epistolary style. And I'll admit, I think this is only the second epistolary I've read. I've read Frankenstein before, and that's it. That had a really interesting narrative structure, but it didn't convince me that an epistolary could be a really creative format. I always thought, like, I had this prejudice against letter writing. Like, who wants to read a book as a series of letters? That doesn't sound good. But I am seeing that, man, you can really do interesting things with this epistolary format, and I am loving it. It's great. It makes me, after I read this, I want to, like, what are some other epistolary novels that I should check out? I'm pretty sure Bram Stoker, this isn't the only epistolary he's written. So yeah, I think I'm gonna, after I read this, I will seek out some others to read at some point. Okay, the last thing I want to call out is another instance of grotesque imagery, and I am going to read something to you. So the scene is, and I'm going to read a preceding paragraph to kind of set the scene. But basically, it's Van Helsing and Dr. Seward. They've given Lucy a blood transfusion. Van Helsing says, "Don't leave her alone at night. Just stay with her. She's getting better. She's improving." And Dr. Seward, though he's staying with her, he decides, well, she seems okay. I'm going to fall asleep in the next room. So this is Van Helsing arrives, and now we're going to see Lucy after she's been alone in her room over a night. She should be better. And we're going to get to a really gross detail. "As I raised the blind and the morning sunlight flooded the room, I heard the professor's low hiss of inspiration, and knowing its rarity, a deadly fear shot through my heart. As I passed over, he moved back, and his exclamation of horror, 'Gott in Himmel!' needed no reinforcement from his agonized face. He raised his hand and pointed to the bed, and his iron face was drawn and ashen white. I felt my knees begin to tremble. Notice ashen white. There on the bed, seemingly in a swoon, lay poor Lucy, more horribly white and wan-looking than ever. Even the lips were white, and the gums seemed to have shrunken back from the teeth, as we sometimes see in a corpse after a prolonged illness. Van Helsing raised his foot to stamp in anger, but the instinct of his life and all the long years of habit stood to him, and he put it down again softly. 'Quick,' he said, 'bring the brandy.'" I'm ending on that "bring the brandy" line. I'm always tickled when alcohol is used as a medicinal, as medicine. I always think that's funny. But yeah, that line. So the two sentences again here that really drew my attention were Lucy, more horribly white, again white, horribly white and wan-looking than ever. Even the lips were white, and the gums seemed to have shrunken back from the teeth, as we sometimes see in a corpse after a prolonged illness. So that's a very grotesque image for me. And again, if I were making a movie, that would be a detail that I'd be like, we need to make her look gross, like a corpse. And I'm calling out, there's two, notice white was mentioned 3 times, actually. Van Helsing turns white. Lucy has turned white. Her gums, oh no, now her lips, unlike the vampire with the red lips, her lips are white. White. So white is, with those white vampire teeth, I'm noticing it's a color of the vampires. So we're back to like this, using colors to mean, maybe linking to the vampires themselves. Her lips are not red yet, so, she's still alive. She's not undead. But yeah, that's a detail that really stood out to me. I liked it a lot. As I'm going to continue to read this, I'm on the lookout for more uses of light, uses of color, and just grotesque, unsettling, disturbing, macabre imagery. And I'm just overall, I'm really enjoying this. So that's all for now. So hopefully that wasn't too scattered. But I just wanted to call out just several things that I found interesting. And, next week I will be reading, I think, up through chapter 16. So I should have another video. We should be finished by Friday, chapter 16. I'm probably going to take the weekend to finish it. But at some point next week, I will have another video for you. If you haven't seen Randy's video, go ahead, check it out. Steve Donahue is also reading the book chapter chapter through chapter, so I'll link to one of his videos down below. So check his videos out as well if you want to have someone read it to you. But that's all for now. Thank you.